In this video, I'm going to talk about mapping, various ways and tools and techniques that I use and have used over the years for mapping dungeons. So this is a map that I drew up many years ago. I'm not exactly sure, but it was quite a few years ago, probably around 20 years ago, just based upon various other things. I can't pin it down to a particular date. This was done I drew this up in pencil on using 5 squares per inch book of that I had for, I think I originally bought it for a chemistry class. So I did this. This was a small overrun keep. And I did that. This gives you an example of how a lot of people draw it up. And I was using letters for rooms, and you see there were 3 levels and some notes, and there was the compass showing which direction. Now let's take a look at a bit more complicated map. Now this one was what was called my big dungeon. I have several. This is, I guess, what many people would call a mega dungeon. And this one was drawn, is actually earlier dated. I know this one is older than the one that I drew on the other paper. This is done a little bit differently. This is on millimeter paper, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. And again, it's in pencil. You can see all the little details that are there. And then we go back to the original keep in a slightly different fashion. This is the keep redrawn using Campaign Cartographer 3. So those are some examples of maps that I've actually used. Now I'm going to talk about tools and techniques. The simplest and most common one that people use are the 5 squares to the inch, and you can pick up a book like this one. They're on most campus bookstores if you're around a college, or if you can order them online. They're not as common. I looked in Staples, at least the one that's near me. They don't have a very good selection per se. That you would probably find it better at a campus bookstore, because you often see this type of stuff for chemistry and physics, mainly chemistry and I believe biology, though I didn't take many biology courses. This is the actual map that I scanned in earlier that you can possibly see. This is 5 squares to the inch, and what happens is that if you do 5 squares to the inch and each square is 5 feet, that gives you 25 feet per inch, which is the one that most people are familiar with. So let me put that. Now let me introduce you into something that many people haven't seen. That's the one where I showed before. And that's this stuff. And you can tell this is larger. This is what's called 1/510 millimeter graph paper. And I don't know if you can actually see this, but it's just graph paper. But the difference is that it's done in millimeters. And if you work out the math, that there are 25.4 millimeters to an inch. So if you make 1 millimeter equal 1 foot, you get 25.4 feet to the inch using millimeter graph paper, which is just slightly different, a little bit higher, tiny bit higher density than what you get with the 5 square per inch if you go to the millimeter graph paper. But the advantage of the millimeter graph paper is that, first off, it's got lines at 5 feet and at 10. The 10 feet, that's why it's called 1/510, is that the 5 feet you really can't see, and it would be hard to even show and scan it in there. The lines at 5 feet, you can see the 10-foot gradations, and there's also a thicker line at 5 feet. So it's easy to measure. You can actually, if you've got a ruler with a metric scale along the top, you can measure, and millimeters turn into feet. So you could actually do diagonal measure quite easily with just a simple little ruler. It has the advantage for me, what I spent some time in Europe, and that's where I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, is when I was in Europe. And my first map, the first big dungeon, or the first dungeon I really drew, which unfortunately I don't have, I threw away, was on the 5 squares per inch paper. I think that was it. Might have been 4 squares per inch paper, because that's even a little bit more common. And I picked that up, I think, in the PX and there, and it was, then somebody introduced me to the engineering paper. This is what is called A3 paper, and it's larger. It's 29.7 centimeters by 42 centimeters, which is approximately 11.7 inches by 16.5 inches, which is a little bit different. It's a little bit taller, but a little bit narrower than 11 by 17 inch ledger paper. I actually found, but this in the United States anymore is really difficult to find. This kind of paper, which looks, it's also 1/510, but graph paper is not as commonly done today, because you've got computers have automated so much that people have moved away from that. But this is on ledger paper as opposed to A3, and you really can't tell the difference in size, and I'm not even going to try. But it's a little bit different in size. I have a stack of these, and the advantage is that it's a larger sheet of paper. It's it's like 11 by 17. It's ledger paper, so you have a lot bigger space to draw with. It's a very fine rule, and if you're doing like I did, which was walls were 1 foot thick, which works that way, and that has some interesting advantages. You can say, oh, walls are 3/4 of an inch thick, and that means you can, if I reach over here and pull it out, I can do a pencil. This is a mechanical pencil with a 0.7, which means when I draw the line, that's the actual thickness of the wall. That puts it 7/10 of a foot. You can work out the math for how many inches thick that is. Or you could do, this one is 0.5. You can run this, so your walls are 6 inches thick, which you could actually draw, which is more closer to the US standard right now. You have a 2x4s in the center, and then with that, they're actually maybe 5 inches. And then if you're truly, I gotta see if I got it here someplace. I think I have it. No, I don't. I have an 03 millimeter pencil, which is harder to find, but you will find them up at engineering. If you go to, I found mine at a college engineering bookstore, and you go into it, and so you can actually draw 03. And yeah, I was truly insane. I was running 03 millimeter pencils with number 4 lead, which gives you very hard lead, which gives you very light, thin lines. And yeah, I've done some insane things, but you actually probably want to go with a number 1 lead in a 04 in a 3 millimeter pencil. But there's that. But it also means that you're engineering, that you can draw it up easily. It's there. I'll put a couple of links to finding. I found 1/510 millimeter paper on Amazon. You can buy it. Unfortunately, it's expensive because, I was seeing, the books of paper, the 5 to the inch. I thought I saw somewhere where you could buy a book of like 50 sheets of it for less than $1. And there are, if you go out on the web and do a search for printable graph paper, you can find some that will print. They'll give you the PDF, and then you could print it, and it will come out for you. So you can do that fairly inexpensively. But if you're interested in the 1510, it costs about the A3 from Silvine Graph Paper A3, 1 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 10 millimeter. 50 sheets of it costs about $24, including shipping. A bit more expensive, gives you the A3 paper, which is large, which you can, I think it's large enough to draw any level that you'd normally want to draw for a mega dungeon. And you're only stuck with, you're only stuck with your imagination, and you can draw that up. There I also found an A4 book of Chartwell graph paper up. They're both down in the links. That is A4 paper, which is closer to the standard 8.5 by 11 in the United States, and that's about 31 cents a page. Still a bit more expensive, but not an awful lot. I mean, okay, it's 16 bucks including shipping in the United States, but you can get that in, and I think that it gives a better quality. To me, it gives a better quality because you have the ability to measure off by inches. It also means you can do things that mess with your players. None of this 5 by 5, all the rooms are multiples of 5. Pull down, you get the floor plan of where you live. If you live in an apartment, you can find the floor plan of where you live. If you get if you live in a home, see if you can find the floor plan of how your house was built. And you will find that none of the rooms are multiples of 5. You'll often find 11 by 12, 11 feet by 6 inches, or 13 feet, and they're different shapes. They're not this 5 by 5 grid stuff. Expletive deleted. What happens is that it allows you to do things like, see if you can go get a map of your local school. You live around a school, just see if you can find a map of it. I mean, the floor plan of it. A lot of places did it. When I was going to college, I went to the University of Utah initially, and those of you who had the unfortunate duty of going into the Merrill Engineering Building, this is the old Merrill Engineering Building, they did something insane, like they numbered the rooms in the order which they were finished, which meant that the room numbers were basically random. And you could, room 301 could be next to room 335, and then next to that would be room 312. And the only way to know where it was to have a map. You had to go find a map. Find a map, and you had to have a map. The layout was relatively regular, but you couldn't find the actual room numbers. So you get a map of that, and that gives you something to use as a pattern for drawing up a building or whatever in your world. And you will find that it's not 5 foot by 5 foot squares, and you're going to have a hard time fitting things into something like a grid. That was one of the reasons, for those of you who have heard me before, I really disliked the concept of the grid. That was what I really disliked about 4E, and 5E finally relinquished some of that to move away from the grid. And I don't normally use a grid. I draw up my stuff, of course, with computer stuff. I draw up stuff with Campaign Cartographer, and I'm not talking about that, but it allows you to draw up maps. But if your players are expecting a 5 by 5 grid, if you draw your rooms just average size, say make them 12 feet wide. So you have a series of 12-foot wide rooms. That's going to mess with the players because it's wider than your 5 foot, or it's wider than 10 feet. It's not 2 squares. If you're providing the maps, if they're providing the maps, but what it allows you to do is it allows you to maybe hide a room to fit a room in, because if they're trying to draw up and match your maps that as you're going through, that it allows you the ability to do that without going to, as I have done in some instances where entire sections of the dungeon move and rotate, and so on, and it makes it harder for people to, you can get lost, which is an interesting feature in adventures. Getting characters lost because they've lost their reference point. You know, that's the advantage to doing that. Now that's why I like Campaign Cartographer. I've been using Campaign Cartographer since Campaign Cartographer 2. It was really, really a long time. I've been using it. Some of my maps are dated in the 90s. I may have actually used it in the late 1980s, but it was a tool I've used. I've got lots of dungeons that I've drawn up with that. But there are problems with that, and I've talked about that in a different video, and I'm not going to talk about that with this one. The other thing that you can do with your maps, if you're talking about coming online, is to then chop them up into individual rooms, so to display them to the characters. And I've done this also, and that may be a whole nother video because it's a little bit more detailed. I use a tool called GIMP. Which the advantage to it is that it's free. It's out there. It's very powerful. Not the most intuitive tool, particularly. I know I have a hard time figuring out what some of the little icons mean. I find them somewhat counterintuitive. But you find once you get used to how it works, you can you scan your map, or if you draw your map in Campaign Cartographer and you export the map, then you can pull the map up into, you know, the exported map into GIMP and chop out just a room. So then when you're playing online, you can show this. Now I have done the insanity, and I have some books over on the shelf where I did this with Campaign Cartographer, and I do not recommend this approach, but you could actually create each room is a separate layer in the map. So what happens is that the reason I don't suggest it is as you get more than just 3 or 4 rooms in anything, like just drawing up this little keep, each room becomes a separate layer, and you have to turn them on and off, and just doing that becomes a little intense and insane. So I've done that. In fact, at one time I did that, and I have a book over on the shelf where I did each room, and I did a hex grid. This is going back to 2nd and 3rd edition. Instead of the square grid, I had a hex grid printed out on each room, and I had printouts for each room through the thing so we could deal with miniatures. That was insane. And it was such a tremendous amount of work that I can't recommend going that route because it's just too much work for the average person. But I'm not the average person. I do some insane things, and I tend to take gaming to some insane extremes. But you can do that in Campaign Cartographer, but it's just a little bit, it gets lost. And the problem I have is that pulling up some of those maps that I drew, they're still will display, but I can't remember how to run the macros I wrote to display, because I had to write it, they had to do some programming to turn the macros on, to turn it so I could flip it to display only this this room or so on, and then do the export and all the insanity that caused. And so in general, I just go, okay, let's copy all that stuff down to a single layer and go from there. But you can do that kind of stuff with Campaign Cartographer. The other advantage to Campaign Cartographer is that you can draw it up, and then you can grab a section, you can draw up part of your map, grab a section of it, and rotate it. Okay, let's rotate it 15 degrees and put it next to another piece that's not rotated 15 degrees. And then draw some stuff between them, which causes all kinds of problems with characters going, oh, it's all on the square grid. And I'm going, no, it's not, because I've rotated things like that. Now, if you want to do that with just regular paper, go out and buy yourself a can of spray adhesive. Interesting stuff, fun stuff to do, play with. You can pick that up at Staples. I think they have it, or you can order it definitely through Amazon. and cut out parts of your map. Get a larger sheet, maybe a sheet of cardboard if you want, or poster, heavier paper. Cut out your map sections, spray them with that, then carefully slap them down and rotate them yourself. And you now have your map. And you've drawn it, and then you've adjusted it, and each section is still on your grid, but it doesn't match the way the players are expecting. So you could do, it'd be an interesting one to do, is maybe I'll have to write, this is one of the things I have to write down in a notebook. Create a map with each section, and then you pick each section up and clone it, copy it, and rotate it a few degrees, or even if you just rotate it at 45 degrees, and you create a map that goes in a big circle, but the sections get, they're rotated by 45 degrees each piece. It's actually more fun if you did it, like, say, with 30 degrees or something, which would give you 12. And so what happens is that would mess with the characters to be a way to create a large mega dungeon fairly easily, and I think it works better than the geomorphs. That's the other problem with the geomorphs, is that they all tend to lay out that way. If you've got the digital geomorphs, think about doing this. If you've got the digital copy, print out a piece, print out another piece, rotate it, and then spray the back of them with spray adhesive, and place them down on a larger sheet of paper. Cut out the pieces parts you want, and attach them. Then you just draw a few lines, and it will mess with players, but each individual section is now relative. For those of you, the best example of this in real life, go to Denver. Denver, that actually, it says if you've been to Denver, the streets take a 45-degree turn, because there were actually two cities that grew together, and they are the grid patterns for the cities are off by 45 degrees. And so you run into all these streets that collide at different angles, and it makes navigation somewhat interesting. If you've ever seen the Flatiron Building in New York, you see how the roads don't come in at straight angles. Do that. Do things like that. I mean, the Flatiron Building is an architectural, I've heard that it's viewed as an architectural wonder. I've been in the Flatiron Building, and it's got I actually interviewed for a position for that in there many, many years ago, and I turned it down. And one of the things that sort of turned me off was that the building is so old, it doesn't really have good central air conditioning, which the time I interviewed, if you've ever been in in New York when it's in the summer, and the building has it doesn't have central air conditioning, and they were just using swamp coolers in the windows, and you go, this is where I'm going to be working all the time. I have other options, and I turned that down for other reasons too. But that was one of the things that was there. But it's an interesting shaped building, because you see it comes in at a very narrow angle, and I interviewed with someone who had one of the quote corner offices, which was interesting shaped office. But that gives you an idea. Take a look at drawing up your maps, and don't limit yourself to 5 by 5 squares, because it's a tyranny. And it's 5 by 5 squares. Your players begin to expect it. Oh, all the hallways are 5 feet wide. No. Why not make your hallways 3 feet wide, or 4 feet, or 6 feet wide? Or I did one where the hallways are all 50 feet wide. That's in a dungeon called Hellwell, which is, for those of you who've read Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light, yes, it's based upon Lord of Light, Hellwell. It's a fascinating dungeon that has a very, very high fatality rate. And yeah, that was hilarious to play, and truly interesting to draw up. And none of that is on a grid. All are regularly shaped. It's caverns, and you've got this. You draw this up, but nothing. you know, do different scales, make things different. Somewhere I have a map of a dungeon that I created specifically for a Magic user who was Fireball happy. Yes, Fireball happy means that they love to cast fireballs at everything. And this was back, I guess it was 2nd edition, where it gives the volume. Might have been the 3rd. I think it gives the volume of the fireball based upon the level of the character who casts it. So I drew up a dungeon that was, I calculated the volume. You know, for those of you who have a little physics background, you can calculate the volume of something. I calculated the volume. The volume of the entire dungeon was less than the fireball, the effect of the fireball that the Magic user could cast. Yeah. Most of the hallways were only 18 inches high. And the main hallway where the characters could come in was 2.5 feet wide by 5 feet high. And so you have to stoop and come through. Why you would go into that, they did. And then they're attacked by Barbie dolls, basically. And the players, of course, they cast the fireball, which blew up the dungeon. Yes. Yeah. I want to... Truly nasty. I didn't kill the party killed the party. But because they cast a fireball when they get there, when you get attacked by little Barbie dolls, which can do 1 hit point of damage because they got little spears and things like that. But drawing up things like that can mess with your players because it's not the scale that they're expecting. You know, if you draw something massive, think about doing Jack and the Beanstalk, where they find something that goes up, where everything is massive scaled. Those type of adventures you can do, but you, and this is where some of the interesting mapping comes about, because you can draw it. And I do, for me, I like Campaign Cartographer and can do that, though it's got some real issues, particularly right now. And I have another map video about that one. But I encourage you to take a look at 1/5-10mm graph paper, because it will get you into drawing slightly differently. You'll be amazed at how much different having just a simple change with graph paper. And for those of you, you know, it's as if you can't get it. I think there was one that was printing out 2mm graph paper that you could print out if you could find it, or if you find an engineering place around, pick one up, draw it up. You know, if you got a PC, then you can get your map into your PC, because worst case, you can always pick up your cell phone, take a picture of your map, and then get it onto your computer. Then you can use GIMP, which is free, to chop it up and do whatever you want with it, and then printing things out. So you can do it relatively inexpensively if you've got a computer, which obviously you have some access to if you're watching this. If you get a cell phone with a camera, which many people do, and then you can, you get those, and then if you have some access to a printer where you can print it out. The problem with printing out 1/5-10mm graph paper is because the resolution is fairly high, it doesn't work too well if you're trying to print those out. That's why many of them don't, the free ones don't give you access to 1mm graph paper. The lowest they go is 2mm. But so you almost have to buy this stuff because it's too high resolution for most people's home printers. So that's my video on mapping, and I went way too long. Thank you. If you like my video, press the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate that. Or if this interests you, you can always subscribe to my channel. There's a button right above. I look forward to hearing some comments. Tell me what you think about this, and I'll try and reply, and we can see if I'll do some more of these. Thank you.